Hello, English teachers. Welcome to Grammatical Structures of English. Again, the intention of this course is to introduce essential grammar points you will teach in the future as a full-fledged English teacher. Grammar is challenging to learn, but in time class, you will master this and become confident not only in crafting lessons on grammar, but also in communication where you're expected to display grammatical competence. Before we go to the main topic, let me show you these sentences. We have I love you, I loved you, I will love you, I have loved you, I had loved you, I will have loved you, I am loving you, and I will have been loving you. Are all of these grammatical? All of these class are grammatical sentences. In fact, they represent 8 of the tense aspect combinations in English. We see how they differ in terms of structure, right? But how about their differences in meaning? How do they actually differ in terms of meaning? Using the different things we will learn about each tense aspect combination, we hope to find the answer to this question. To begin our quest in identifying the differences of the sentences we've seen a while ago, let's look at the definition of both the tense and the aspect. Take note of the following differences in terms of their meanings. Tense class refers to a grammatical device for situating events, states, or actions according to time. Every language, if you go back to our discussion of Introduction to Linguistics, has a different way of encoding time. There are languages that use words instead of structural markers on words, while some rely solely on the context where and when an utterance is made. Now, in English, if we are to consider tense as something marked structurally, again, if we will only consider tense on the basis of structural markers on the words, which are for the most part inflections, we would have only two tenses, the present and the past tense. If a verb is in present tense, that verb may take either no S or S, depending on the number of the subject. On the other hand, if a verb is in past tense, this verb may be added with the inflection D, the inflection ED, or ultimately change its spelling as with irregular verbs. These are the reasons why in English, only the present and the past are acknowledged as tenses. Now you might be asking, how about the future tense, sir? Is future tense not part of the English tense aspect system? For all intents and purposes, we will refer to future as a tense, but as a pseudo one. This is because verbs situated in the future do not have a grammatical marker unlike the present and the past. Now, if no structural marker or the absence of structural marker makes a verb placed under future tense, what are our means to know if the verb used in the sentence is indeed intended in the future? Though future verbs class do not have markers that identify them as future, they have modals and adverbs to suggest futurity, something we do not see in the past and present verbs. Just remember that when we talk of tense, we mean the speaker's placement of the verb or identification of the verb according to time, which may be past, present, or future. Now, class, note that note that different from the time signaled by the tense, the aspect has to do with the internal structure of the action occurring at a given time. What do we mean by internal structure of the action? This internal structure class refers to the completeness of the action being told. Let us take the simple or zero aspect as an example. If the present tense verb is in simple aspect, the internal structure of the verb is complete at the present time. It is not incomplete, unlike the progressive aspect, not happening prior to anything, unlike the perfect aspect, and not an incomplete event that happened prior to anything, but continues after that prior time, such as in the case of the perfect progressive tandem. In a nutshell, in a simple aspect or in simple aspect, the events are conceptualized as complete wholes. Right? This means to say that there would be no further development. The action in the simple aspect is complete in itself. If we say, for example, I love you, an example of simple present, this could mean that the speaker's love is, following the meaning of simple present tense, an action made at the time this utterance was made. It is not. This sentence is not an incomplete action or something that may change, like in the progressive aspect, or an event that has already happened, like in perfect aspect. It's an action completed at the moment of speaking. If it was completed then, there would be no more further development. Does it mean, sir, that love stops there? The answer is no. Remember that pragmatically, love does not develop. It's the person who loves and love that becomes developed. Love begins development and not something that is developed to beget more love. Now, you might be asking again, how come that something that is in simple present considered complete when completeness is identified with the past? Right? Isn't illogical to like have the simple present as something complete when it's not yet done? Class, remember that completeness in the context of the tense aspect system um refers to further development. Okay, again, completeness talks of further development. Further development refers to whether or not the action continues or whether or not the action occurred before another action. To say I love you means that the speaker speaks of that love right there and without any possibility of development, which may entail change class. This may even be said to be truth free of time or a timeless truth, like in the case of the earth revolves around the sun. To say I'm loving you means that the speaker speaks of love with possibility of development or change. This change, class, as everyone understands, may be positive or negative, thereby saying that this love pertained to by the sentence I'm loving you is something we can identify as temporary. To say I have loved you means that the speaker speaks of love as an event that happened before the moment of speaking. Remember that the perfect aspect is always related with an action that has happened prior to the action being mentioned in the sentence. There are two possibilities in using the perfect aspect, right, in this sentence. I have loved you. First is that the speaker continues to love the addressee or the speaker, or number two, the speaker's love for the addressee has ended already before the moment he said the utterance. It could be that the speaker has already um, ended his or her love for the addressee or that the speaker continues to love the addressee. Okay, there are two possibilities if you're using the perfect aspect in order to convey the idea of love. These three examples, class, show that completeness of the action entails the continuation or the positioning of the action within a continuum of actions. That's what aspect is all about. You are placing the action um, with the relevance or with respect to the other actions. Okay, like in the case of simple present. Okay, it's the only action. It's something that we consider complete. In the case of perfect aspect, there would be two actions, and you need to place. All right, if the action is considered as perfect, then that action should be placed prior to the action being pertained to at present, at past, or at a particular future time. In the case of progressive, you're placing that action as something that progresses or something that develops. I hope that you understand by now, okay, what we mean by aspect. In the case of simple present, class, let's just go back to simple present. In the case of simple present, the actions are spoken in present time and occurs completely at present, not in any other time. Okay, again, going back to the idea of placing that action within a continuum of action. Okay, when we say continuum of action, we're referring to a number line in mathematics. There, I mean, you could place that action in any particular point in that particular continuum. You'll understand this more, class, the application of aspect in the succeeding examples in this. Right now, I think that we can proceed already with the form, okay, of the 12 tense aspect combinations of the English language. These 12 were conceived, class, by the three tenses you have on the left and the four aspects on the first row on the table. Now, you might be asking, how do we really label the combinations? You see, even combinations have labels. How do we really label the combinations? Are we going to first refer to them by tense and then aspect, or aspect first and then tense? Okay, if it's going to be tense first then aspect, that would be the case of the present perfect or the past progressive. Now, if it's going to be aspect first, then tense, right, we refer to simple present, simple past, and simple future. Now, the answer is this. Only the combinations made with the simple aspect, again, only the combinations made with the simple aspect take the way of calling by aspect first, then tense. So we have simple present, simple past, and simple future. In the case of perfect, progressive, and perfect progressive tandem, you begin with the tense followed by the aspect like present progressive, present perfect, or future perfect progressive. Right. Given this explanation, you'll know that there are two ways of labeling the combinations. Note that here in the column of the simple aspect, the verb will only change from base form to S form if the verb is in present tense and if the preceding noun or subject is in third person singular. All other nouns, aside from being third person singular, do not affect the form of the verb in the simple present tense. The verbs in the simple past tense, on the other hand, will either take the inflection D or ED or change its spelling altogether, like in the case of wrote, which is originally write in the present tense. Now, to suggest futurity, the speaker will use modals like will, might, could, and other modals that you can see on the next chapter of the grammar book, right after the tense aspect combinations. In the case of the perfect aspect, we add has, have, or had, depending on the tense and the number of the preceding noun. In the case of present perfect, you add has or have to the past participle of the verb. Has is used if the subject is in third person singular, and have if the subject is plural or is in first or second person. Now, in the case of the past perfect form, all you have to do is add the verb had to the past participle of your main verb. There's no need to think a lot when it comes to the past perfect form. Okay, if the tense is in past perfect, then all you have to do is add the helping verb had. Okay, and then what follows is the past participle of the main verb. In the case of futurity, we just add the modal will or other modals. Okay, you can use will, might, could, whichever modal would be appropriate in your sentence. Right after that modal, you write the past participle of the verb. So again, we just add the modal will or other modals plus have, then write the past participle of the verb. Modal, have, then past participle. Let's move on to the form of the tenses according to the or according to progressive aspect. Okay, so there are three forms possible in the case of present progressive. We have am plus present participle in the case that the subject is I. Is plus present participle is used when the subject is singular or in third person singular. Are plus present participle, on the other hand, suggests that the subject is in plural form. Now, in the case of past progressive tense aspect, present participle is still used after the be copula. Here you can choose or you choose between was or were depending on the number of the subject this copula precedes. Unlike the present and past progressive tense aspects class, the future progressive takes the modal will or any modal, the copula be without transformation, and the present participle. I think that the only thing that we have to remember here is that in future progressive, the copula is not transformed in any way. This is in contrast, of course, with how the copula was treated in the present and past progressive tense aspects. How about the form of the tandem or the combination of the perfect and progressive aspect? After the subject of the sentence, which is in present perfect progressive, has or have is written depending again on the number of the subject this precedes. Has or have is followed by been and the present participle of the verb. For the past perfect progressive, the same pattern is followed except has or have. To suggest past time or the past tense, had, okay, the helping verb had, is used instead of the previous has and have. Now, in terms of the future perfect progressive, this pattern that you can see on the screen right now is always the one used. After the subject, the modal will, have, been, and the present participle of the main verb are written sequentially. Aside from the forms we commonly use in formal English, we need to also be familiar with how the copula is contracted in both oral and written English. After watching this lecture class, go back to this table and study the represented copula in each contraction. Okay, as everyone knows, in terms of spoken English, we tend to contract the copula B. Okay, so it's like adding just the S, okay, that represents is or was. Um, the contraction of will not would likewise be considered as a contraction. So, um, kindly consider this table, okay, so that everyone is familiar with how the different copular verbs are contracted. Copular verb pertaining to the right now, we want to focus our attention to the second and third categories we use to describe grammar items, meaning and use. But before I show you the meaning and use of the 12 combinations, let it be known to everyone that these three conditions on the meaning of those combinations I've mentioned. Okay, we have to also consider these three conditions on the meaning of those combinations. What are those conditions, class? Okay, it's easy to like memorize and apply the different um, meanings or use of the combinations that we're going to discuss. Okay, but of course, before that, we have to look at the conditions. Okay, first, remember that future time may be conveyed in various forms. Again, future time may be conveyed in various forms. It's not only by using simple future tense aspect or any kind of aspect under the future tense that we would be able to like convey future time. You can use other tenses or aspects. Right. Now in this slide, we'll see that future or the future tense may either be represented by the simple present or the present progressive tense aspect. Look at the sentence for simple present. I finished on the 28th of June and I start the summer camp on the 8th of July. Though this sentence is written in the simple present tense aspect, the meaning entailed is that there will be an action to finish and to start at a particular future time. However, this is still in simple present tense aspect because this tense may be used to describe an event or action scheduled to happen on a future time. Note that you can also transform this into simple future form. Whichever you use, class, the same meaning will still be conveyed. We only change the form in how we convey that shared. Now, in the sentence, I'm leaving on September for Belfast for a couple of weeks. The entailed meaning is that the action of leaving is due to an imminent or due in an imminent future time. Again, this form is possible for present progressive because one of its functions is to describe an event that begins at present and will culminate at a latter and predictable part of the future. Despite its form and meaning, however, one may also see this sentence as something that assumes the function of the simple future tense. Now, the purpose of this consideration or this particular point here is to let you see that there is always a gray area as to the differences of the different tense aspects. If you use any of them, or you may use any of them as long as that form that you chose allows the clear conveyance of the meaning. Okay? You can choose any of the tense aspects as long as the meaning is properly or will be clearly communicated to the receivers. The next consideration is this. The meaning of a tense or aspect depends on the extent of the verb's meaning. Okay, let me just give you the overview for this consideration. There are some verbs, class, that we cannot write as a progressive or in a progressive aspect, like in the case of knowing. Right? Yes, you can write it as a present participle or even write it as a gerund. But if you're going to write the verb know as a progressive, that would be quite inappropriate. Like in the case of he is knowing the town. Okay, that would not be appropriate. Let's see the reason for that. To just reiterate what was mentioned, the meaning conveyed by the tense aspect is always dependent on the nature of the verb. An example of this is a certain verb which may not be taken as progressive. These verbs are what we call imperfective verbs or ones that construe events without an endpoint. So these are verbs without endpoint. The verb know is an example of this imperfective verb. Okay, it doesn't have an endpoint. Knowing has no endpoint, class. You may not transform this into knowing, such as in the sentence, he is knowing the truth because the verb know does not pertain to a process that eventually ends at a particular point in time or future time. Again, the progressive aspect suggests that the action has begun and continuous or has been continuing even to the future time. In other words, with development, imperfective verbs are not like this, class. They do not have a place in the future as an achieved action. Okay? They don't have any particular. Perfective verbs, on the other hand, represent actions that are temporally or time bound. When you say temporally bounded or temporal, referring to. So if they are temporally bounded, perfective verbs are considered time bound or there is always an end point. Okay? We may transform perfective verbs into progressive since it is anticipated that the perfective verb will be perfected in a particular time in the future. The point of this discussion or this consideration, class, is to tell you that not all verbs, again, may be formed in a tense aspect of your choice. It is your job as an English teacher to look at the nature of the verb first before you use it in a particular tense. As a teacher, you take on and work related duties. So you have to be very careful a particular tense aspect. Now, remember that perfectives resist the simple present, but take the progressive while imperfective do the opposite. Perfective that takes. Okay, finally, the last concept have many. Let's take the inflection D or As an example, ends with an E, it means that the verb is past tense, right? I think that everyone will agree with that. If the verb is transformed as a past tense, as a yes, a past tense form, or ed, okay, that action has been completed already, past. Now, what if the sentence is this? If I walked home after school today, it would take me all afternoon. Now, is this sentence in past tense? Like at first glance, it's a yes. But if you're going to look at the meaning conveyed by the sentence, it's going to be a big no. Why? The verb walked, as you can see, is part of an if clause that has not happened yet. So it's like an imaginary or imaginary action. Imaginary. E or E connected to the clause that is considered additional, automatically demanded if the main clause is in as. Now, in the question, did you eat before the game? Did you want to eat before? Why did the speaker use did instead of do? Okay. Right? Does it mean that the speaker has mentioned something ungrammatical? No. The obvious reason for the use of did is to suggest a formal tone. Okay, so remember when you're talking with someone in authority, the more distant your tone is, or the more distant your language is, the more you exert formality between the two of you. Now, again, the more distant the tone is, in the case of the use of past tense, the more that the person exudes a formal and distinct tone or distant tone. Now, before going to the main dish of the lesson, which is all about the meaning and use of the 12 combinations, note that these meanings, according to the considerations we have mentioned, may overlap and or affected by the verb form. Again, it's the job of the English teacher to look at the nature of the verbs and make sure that the students are using the correct form of the verbs for each tense aspect that you're going to deliver to the class. Okay, let's begin our discussion of meaning and use. The simple present tense aspect. Again, the simple aspect conveys a complete and unchanging action. According to Lewis, 1986, the main goal of the simple present is to convey factuality. Now, what are the sublevels of conveyance of factuality? Something is factual if it happens habitually, happens as a timeless truth, happens as a state, as a speech act that details scheduling of an event, doing a present action or action accomplished at the time of speaking. Right? These are the subcategories of factuality according to Lewis 1986. Let's take a look at the first function. Okay, habitual actions in the present. How do we know that the subject in our example takes walking to school as a habit? Of course, the presence of the adverb every day suggests that the walking part is done habitually. What are other examples? I go to church every Sunday. We submit weekly reports. Now, all of these two sentences, or the two sentences I have right here, are things that are done habitually because of the use of the simple present tense. Now, aside from telling habitual actions, the simple present tense is also used to tell general timeless truths like the earth revolves around the sun and Filipinos sleep at siesta. The first one tells us of a scientific truth, while the second one says something about a custom. And we cannot say that the earth is revolving around the sun because that would mean that this revolution is a process that changes from time to time. Since this is a timeless truth, we refer to this scientific phenomenon in the simple present tense. So imagine if you're going to use simple present tense, the use of it entails celebrities, right? Now, simple present tense is also used to indicate certain states, like in these examples. I know, Mr. Jackson, there is a large house there. Um, there are, these are other stative verbs that take simple, or that take simple present, and definitely not the progressive aspect. Sir, can they be used in perfect aspect? Again, this is the list of stative verbs, okay, that take simple present and not the progressive aspect. Now, can they be used in perfect aspect? The answer is yes. These states may either be simple or perfect again, or perfect aspect, but definitely not in the aspect that suggests process. Again, the following verbs right here may be either simple or perfect, but definitely not in the aspect that suggests process. Another meaning or use of the simple present is this. The simple present is present in the subordinate clause. Okay, or another meaning or use of the simple present is this. Okay, simple present is present in the subordinate clause of time or condition when the main clause contains future time verb, like in the following examples. After he finishes work, he'll do the errands. If Mariz completes the assignment, she'll be rewarded. The main clause here is in future tense aspect, while the subordinate or the if clause is in simple present tense. This happens if and only if the main clause suggests futurity, thus making the sentence hypothetical. Now, simple present may also be added to indicate a future time, but only if this future time class is indicated by a scheduled event. Again, this future time is indicated as a scheduled event only. These are some of the examples. I have a meeting next week around that time. The program begins tomorrow. We know that these are scheduled events because of the adverbials next week and tomorrow. Now, I don't know if you have been listening to broadcasts of sporting events, but probably you have heard the announcer saying, here comes Tenorio passing the ball to Fernandez, who shoots it, and yes, 2 points for the red team. In events where the actual event is happening, we use simple present tense. That's why it's here comes Tenorio passing the ball, Fernandez shoots. You've heard anchors on Studio 23 on UAAP. You would know that this is rather evident. This is the same with the usual line of the MC when there is someone who will conduct a choir for the prayer or the national anthem. We say, let's all rise and sing the national anthem as Mr. Genaro Edroza leads the choir. It's not as Genaro Edroza will lead the choir. It's going to be leads the choir, not sing the national anthem, which will become conveyed by Mr. Genaro Edroza. Okay, and then yeah, the national anthem being placed on the future tense aspect. Since this happens as a present event, simple tense aspect or simple present tense must be used. Demonstrations are also live and actual events. You may use the future tense aspect, but it will be most appropriate to use the simple present, especially if you are doing the thing while saying it. An example is, now I apply a shade of pink on my eye. Right? Or those who conduct blogs, they typically use the simple present tense. Okay, so present speech acts class are also told to be simple present tense. Aside from these examples, we have I declare the Olympic Games open, or I bless you in the name of the gods. Okay, so these are some examples of what they call this, of this function of the simple present tense aspect. Again, speech acts or present speech acts class are also told using simple present tense. Aside from these examples, we have I declare the Olympic Games open, or I bless you in the name of the gods. How about when you're watching a historical documentary class? Have you heard the narrator telling the stories as if they were happening at present? This is because in presenting past events in narration, it is rhetorically effective to present them using simple present. An example is this. As the Nazi rests in Berlin, the Allied powers begin their entry on Normandy. All right. I hope that you remember those functions by heart so you'll be mindful also of the tense aspect of the utterance you make orally and textually. Let us have the functions and uses of the simple past tense. Class, this tense aspect still presents factual information, but in a remote period in time or a time we have no more access to. Remoteness comes in the feeling that the order is over and done with. This remoteness from the event is conveyed by or conveyed the best when you exclaim, I finished my term paper. Right? That is something, or the action there is something remote. Sir, can we say I'm finished with my term paper instead of I finished my term paper? Yes, of course. But note that the first one tells you your state, while the second one tells of an action that happened in the past. This remoteness class may also be remoteness from reality, like when we use the simple past tense in an if clause. Using simple past, the sentence here became even more hypothetical. Also, simple past tense allows the speaker of the utterance to be distant or again remote from certain people, like in this example. They said that they loved grammar. You may see the people who said this class, but seeing them does not necessarily mean being close to them. So, in other words, simple past enables remoteness not only from reality but also from people who are part of the sentence we say. Similar to what I mentioned a while ago about politeness or formality, using the simple past allows you as the speaker to be a bit remote from the one you're talking with. The more remote you are, like in this example, the more formal you become. Okay, so much for remoteness. Let's look at the functions and uses of this tense aspect. First, simple past tense aspect is used to tell a definite, single completed event or action. This means that anything that happened in a definite time in the past will take simple past. This is seen in the example I attended the virtual faculty meeting last week. The action here is in a definite point in the past because of the time adverbial last week. Now, if simple present is used to tell habitual action at present, the simple past tense is used to tell something of a habitual action or event done in the past. In the second example, you have the adverb of time every day until another adverbial of time was attached, which is last summer. The simple past is also used in a past event with implications that are no longer applicable to the present. An example is this: Professor Nelson taught at Yale for 30 years. So here, Professor Nelson taught there for 30 years, but is no longer affiliated at Yale, thus making this action complete and remote in the past. Class, stated verbs, again, stative verbs, can likewise be turned into their simple past tense form. Examples are the ones that we have right here. Another function and use of the simple past tense is to form the verb for the imaginative conditional in the subordinate clause. The subordinate one here being the one that begins with if. This is different from if clause we have for the simple present tense. There, the conditional used is a type 1 conditional wherein the goal is to talk about things which might or which is possible or are possible to happen in the future. An example will be, if the rain stops, I will go to the market. The one that you can see right now is an example of the type 2 conditional wherein the goal is to talk about things in the future that are probably not going to be true or not going to come true. In other words, this one is imaginative if not speculative. Note that taking better of oneself does not necessarily equate to having lesser absences. Now, this is the last meaning or use of the simple past tense. Here, we can see that the speaker uses the simple past in order to put distance between him or her and the receiver of the utterance. Sounding formal or polite might be the motivation for saying, did you want to sit down and stay for a while, or did you go to the office to ask the same question? Again, the speaker here is trying to be polite or remote by using simple past tense form of the different action words. Now, let's proceed to the meaning and use of the simple future tense aspect. This is used to tell an event conceptualized as a whole, but cannot be factually knowable in the way the present and the past tenses can. Though the modal will marks the future tense, this modal has a lot of uses. You may use other markers to suggest the future time. Just note that this tense aspect talks of an event or action that is expected to be completed at a certain time in the future. Again, this tense aspect is used to tell an action that will take place at some definite future time. Again, this tense aspect is used to tell an action that will take place at some definite future time. Examples are the director will visit that branch next year, and we will defend our thesis tomorrow. Note that the adverb of time here is the marker that allows us to know that the action will indeed be completed at a definite future time. In the case of the first sentence, we have next year. In the case of the second one, we have tomorrow. Next is that the simple future allows the speakers to talk of a future habitual action or state. Habitual actions class may be happening at present, happen in the past, or will happen in the future. Okay, this is our example. After November, the professors will undergo capacity trainings on content areas every semester. This tells us, this tells us that the simple future may talk of a habitual action right after a certain future time, which in this case is November. Present habits expected to continue in the future are likewise conveyed in sentences that use the simple future. Note that this must be accompanied by a preceding sentence that acts as source or motivation for the habits that might persist in the future. This explanation is very well reflected in the example we have right here. Simple future class may also be used to convey sentences where there is a situation that may happen in the present and will happen in the future, but with some termination in sight. In the example, Nora will live in Caracas until she improves her Spanish. The future telling us that Nora will live in Caracas is dependent on another future event conveyed in the simple present. Now, I believe that this meaning and use of the simple future is very common to you. This tense is used in the main clause or result of future conditionals like in our examples. If you go, you'll be sorry, and if you don't go, you will not grow professionally. Okay, so much for the simple aspect. Simple past, simple present, and simple future tense aspect. On this part, we will give emphasis on the perfect aspect. What do we have to remember in the perfect aspect? Take in mind, class, that perfect, again, take in mind that perfect means that the action occurred prior to the time or tense used. So if we use the tense present and it's in present perfect, we mean to say that the perfect here is an action that happened before the present. If we use past perfect there is the action that happened before the past event. And if we use simple future tense aspect, we mean to say that the simple future or the future perfect there, okay, is something that will happen right before that future time is completed. Again, if we say, for example, present perfect, the action in present perfect is the one that happened before the present time or tense. If we say past perfect, the action in the past perfect is the one that happened before the intended past time or tense. If we say future perfect, the action in the future perfect is one that will happen before the intended future action. For you to better understand these, let's look at the individual meaning of the three tenses under the perfect aspect. Let's begin with the present perfect, which is also the first one, okay, that we need to discuss right here. The first meaning or use is that this tense aspect may be used to tell of a situation that began to a prior point in time and continues into the present. For example, I've been a teacher since 2010. The present time here, class, listen up. The present time here is the date when this utterance was spoken. But that event that happens at present, which is being a teacher, happened before the current date, which is 2010. The perfect aspect is the fact of being a teacher since 2010, while the present tense is the present moment when this fact was said. Note, however, that this action that happened before now or before the present still continues now or at present. This is the same with the example, the mayor has led the town for 3 years now. The mayor became a mayor 3 years before this time, uh, that statement or the time when this statement was spoken. Next, the present perfect is also used to convey an action occurring or not occurring at an unspecified prior time that has current relevance. Now, in the sentence, I have already seen that movie, we assume that the speaker spoke of this at the present moment of watching a movie. This sentence is in present perfect because that movie being watched has already been watched by the speaker at a prior time. Sir, why is this not in simple past? Plus, it's because when the action is in simple past, that action is considered isolated or remote in the past. It means to say that it's not anymore affecting anything that happens in the present or the future. Here we have an utterance that was made because of a relevant prior prior action. Now, if an action has been completed recently, we use the present perfect like in the case of the class has just finished watching the series. The word just even more justifies or supports the idea that the watching of the series has finished recently, a prior time before the utterance was spoken. Now, present perfect is also used when an action occurred over a prior time and is completed at the moment of speaking. Again, the action has begun at the time prior to the moment of speaking. The action has begun at the prior time to the moment of speaking, and that this action is being completed at the moment. Look at the example. The value of the Johnsons' house has doubled in the last 4 years. The doubling class of the house's value has begun at a prior time or time before the present time of speaking, and that this increase in the value continues even at the present time. We know this doubling occurred at the prior time because of the adverb last 4 years. Now, the last function of the present perfect is to collocate with verbs in subordinate clauses of time or condition. Now, let's move on to the meaning and uses of the past perfect tense. Number one, this tense aspect allows the speakers to talk of an action completed in the past prior to some other past event. Basically, this tells us that there are two past actions in the past perfect. The past perfect is the action that happened before the simple past action. Let's look at one example. I had left already when she realized my value. Which happened first, the leaving or the realizing part? All right, so I guess everyone would say it's the leaving part. This means that yes, the past action was she realized value or she realized my value or the speaker's value. But another event or action prior to this past occurred, and that was the leaving. Another example is this. He had already left before I could offer him a ride. The leaving part happened prior or before the offering of the ride. Okay, so just remember that again, the past perfect tense aspect is number one, used to allow the speakers to talk of an action completed in the past prior to some other past event. Now, the past perfect may also be used to make the type 3 conditional wherein the goal is to describe a situation that didn't happen or to imagine the result of this situation. This is once again an imaginative, if not speculative, point of the speaker had another course of action was made. Again, this one, this past perfect tense aspect is one that we use in order to create or craft the type 3 conditional. Okay, so like the present and the past perfect, the action supposed to be completed in the future is outrun by another future event. That another future event is the future perfect. An example of this future action that will be completed prior to a specific future time is this. I will have finished all this work by 5 o'clock in the afternoon. Here, it suggested that the action finish will culminate or will finish, right? The action finish will finish at 5 o'clock in the afternoon. But the use of the perfect aspect or the future perfect here denotes that this finishing, the culmination, the culminating of that finishing will end before 5 o'clock. Another example is this sentence. I will have gone home before he gets to cook dinner. Here, the speaker is supposed to get home at the moment when he cooks dinner. But with the future perfect tense aspect, the speaker says that he or she can get home before the future event of cooking the dinner. Lastly, the future perfect tense aspect may be used to tell something about a state or accomplishment that will be completed in the future prior to some other future time or event. An example is this. At the end of 2021, Duterte will have served as president for almost 6 years. The future event class here is 2021. But the perfect or the future perfect tells us that before that or before 2021, the president will have served as president or Duterte will have served as president for 6 years. So again in here, we see that the future tense aspect was used to tell something about a state or accomplishment that will be completed in the future prior to some other future event. Now let's have another example, shall we? Okay, before this year ends, my parents will have been married for 25 years. Which is the future event? Correct. It's the clause before this ends or before this year ends. But before this future event or before that year ends, a prior state or accomplishment which is to be married for 25 years will be realized or will happen first. Right? So there's something of a future event that will happen first before another future event or another or that particular future event we refer to here as a simple future tense aspect. Now, if perfect aspect talks of a prior event, action, or accomplishment, the progressive aspect portrays an event in a way that allows for it to be incomplete, or in other words, imperfective, or somehow limited. In other words, an action or event in progressive aspect is something that continues or develops. How does it differ from the simple aspect? All right, let's look at these two sentences. Here we have Susan and Carl are living in New York, and Susan and Carl lives in New York. The meaning conveyed by the first sentence, which is in progressive form, is that Susan and Carl are temporarily living in New York, whereas the second one tells us that this New York residence is a matter of permanent residence. Again, everything in progressive boils down to temporariness, for the action or event may change. Let's begin the discussion of the progressive aspect with the present progressive. Okay, so this tense is used to denote an activity in progress, like in the sentence, he is attending a meeting now. We know that the attendance to the meeting is in progress because of the adverb of time now. Another meaning and use of this tense aspect is to suggest an extended present. This means that an action will end soon and therefore lacks the permanence of the simple present tense. Permanence is, as we have talked about, related to the simple present. If an action at present will soon end, it would be better to use the present progressive like in the following examples. I'm studying geology at the University of Colorado. Unless the speaker gets consistent failing grades, his or her stay in that university is not permanent, will never be permanent, and will end soon. Waiting in the second example is likewise something that will end in a particular point of time. Next is to suggest that the situation is temporary. Again, the present progressive form is used to suggest that the situation is temporary. I think this has been said repeatedly in the previous examples and explanations. That again, the present progressive, because of its nature to suggest change, is used to tell a temporary situation. The present progressive is also used to say something about a repeated series of ongoing action the as is in the presented example. Henry is kicking the soccer ball around the backyard. Present progressive is used here to say that Henry's kicking is a persistent ongoing act. Now, like the simple present, present progressive may also express future events. This only becomes grammatically correct if the event is planned and that the utterance is supported by a future time adverbial, like in the example, she's coming tomorrow. However, class, these two combinations of tense aspect differ because in the present progressive, one may say that the verb coming is in the process of being accomplished already. This could happen that she comes from the time of speaking up to a certain time tomorrow. Again, this could happen that the she comes from the time of speaking to a certain time tomorrow. So the coming part is already happening the moment it was said. In the simple present tense aspect, the goal is to just express a future event, no denotation of process, unlike in the present progressive one. Again, in here, the sentence in present progressive denotes progress or the process, while the simple present tense allows us to only talk of a particular schedule without any denotation or concern for a certain progress. Okay, so a change in progress and an emotional comment are also carried by the present progressive. Again, progressive entails change. So it is much more appropriate to say she's becoming more and more like her mother than she becomes more and more like her mother. Using this sentence will hinder, or the simple present tense will hinder the element of progression or process. Again, by now you must have like remembered already that when we're talking about progressive, we're talking about progress, unlike what we have in simple present, past, or future, wherein all actions are completed at a certain tense or a certain time. Emotional comments, let's just go back. Emotional comments, on the other hand, like he's always acting up like a child, is said using present progressive. Right? So the emotional comments that we say are always presented using the present progressive tense aspect. Now let's proceed to the meaning and uses of the past progressive. This tense aspect class allows speakers to express an action in progress at a specific point in time in the past. An example would be, he was walking to school at 8:30 this morning. In this sentence, the subject has begun walking but has not yet finished since this is in past progressive. The intention here is to capture an ongoing event in the past which may continue up to the present time. This tense aspect likewise says something about a past action simultaneous with some other event that is usually stated in the simple past. The past progressive provides the background, while the simple past the foreground. An example is this: Karen was washing her hair when the phone rang. Here in this sentence, both actions were in the past, but the washing of the hair tells us that an active and progressive action has been happening when another past action occurred. Okay, so there is an occurrence of an ongoing past action, okay, while or maybe yes, while another past action occurred. I think that this is often used to narrate an event that happened in the past, but with emphasis on certain events that may be best presented if given a progressive nature. Okay, repetition or iteration of some ongoing past action and social distancing are also among the other functions and uses of the past progressive. Okay, now in terms of the future progressive, there are two meanings or uses. The first is that this tense pertains to an action that will be in progress at a specific time in the future. There are two future events here. Before one future event occurs, another future event should occur. Okay, an example would be this. A driver will be waiting for you when you arrive. Now, in here, the future event is the waiting done by the driver, right? But before that happens, the subject need to arrive first. Duration of a future action is likewise covered by the future progressive. Okay, example would be Mavis will be working on the thesis for the next 3 years. Or next 3 years here obviously tells us that this sentence is all about duration of a future action. Now let us proceed to the last aspect, which is the present, or the not the present, the perfect progressive aspect. This aspect combines the prior with the meaning of incompleteness. In this combination, an action is assumed to have begun prior to a particular time and continues from there. Let's look at this example. They have been working hard on a special project. Here, the work has begun prior to the present time and will not probably have a definite end, at least at this point, because of the progressive nature of the tense aspect. To get a good view of the present progressive aspect, let's begin with the meaning and use of the present progressive tense or the present perfect progressive tense aspect. Here we see that it is used when a situation or habit begins in the past, recent or distant, and continues up to the present and possibly into the future. All right, here are some examples, or here is one example. Bart has been going out with Alicia. Bart, as the subject, has begun going out with Alicia in a prior time before now, at the time of speaking. But with the progressive aspect, this renders the going out as a continuing action for both Bart and Alicia. So in this example, we have Bart, who has already made a decision to go out with Alicia. Okay, before the moment this sentence was spoken. Okay, so this pertains to the definiteness. Again, this pertains to the indefiniteness of the time when this was spoken. Because if this was spoken in a definite past time, then this must have been written in the simple past tense. But because there is no future, not future, there if there since there is no particular definite past time here, they will use the perfect aspect. Okay, not only the perfect aspect but also the progressive one because this action has begun at a prior time before the present time and is currently in progress, okay, at the present time. Another function is that it talks of an action in progress that is not yet completed. Like in this example, I've been reading that book. Okay, the reading has begun in the past, but the subject is not yet finished. So, all right, in other words, this action must be in progress. Present perfect progressive also tells of a state that changes over time, like the students have been getting better and better each week. Again, the students have been getting better and better each week. The act of getting better, of course, began at a prior time and continues to be better in the upcoming days. Again, the action of getting better has begun at a prior time in the past, but continues up to the present and maybe up to the future time. Okay, this tense aspect combination is also interestingly used to give a subjective, evaluative comment on something observed over time, triggered by current evidence. Okay, like in the example, you've been drinking again. So, similar to what we have in the progressive aspect, wherein that one you can use to present emotional comments. In this aspect, you can also do that. Okay, given that that utterance is motivated by um something observed over time and something that was triggered by current evidence. Okay, now, how about in the case of the past perfect progressive? This tense aspect class is used to say something about an action or habit taking place over a period of time in the past prior to some other past event or time. Let's have an example. Karen had been working hard, so her doctor told her to take a vacation. She had been trying to finish her degree that year. Here we have two past actions. Again, here we have two past actions. The first being Karen working hard. This is also the prior past action to the second past action, which is when Karen's doctor said she needed a vacation. Note also that at the time when, or the time that the doctor said she needs vacation, Karen is still working hard. The first past is therefore prior and developing ahead of the second past action, which is referred to the fact that the doctor told her to take a vacation. The first past action is ongoing before the second past action was given in the sentence or was made by the doctor. Okay, so past perfect progressive also occurs in situations when there is a past action in progress that was interrupted. Okay, it happens in a past action in progress that was interrupted by a more recent past action. An example would be this: we had been planning to vacation in Maine, but changed our minds after receiving a low price ticket bound for Utah. All right, we have the prior past action in progress, which is the planning for the vacation in Maine, when a more recent event happened. Okay, take note of that as a function of the past perfect progressive tense aspect. The last meaning or use of the past perfect progressive tense aspect is that it allows speakers to tell an ongoing past action or state that becomes satisfied by some other event. An example would be I had been hoping to see that concert, so I was pleased when I won the tickets. The hoping of seeing the concert is the prior past, which goes on while the act of being pleased is the past action that served as background to the main event or action. Now, let's have the last of the 12 combinations of the tense aspect, which is the future perfect progressive. This is used if there is a durative. Again, this is used if there is a durative or habitual action that is taking place in the present and that will continue into the future up until or through a specific future time. Again, example would be on Christmas Eve we will have been living in the same house for 20 years. Again, let me just repeat the example. On Christmas Eve, we will have been living in the same house for 20 years. Here, the future perfect is denoted by the fact that at the moment of speaking, there was no mention as to the definite date when they lived in the same house. The living part has happened long ago. So that means to say that this action is perfect because we're not definite of the time. Progressive, on the other hand, is evident in the sentence saying that they continue to live or to be living there for 20 years now. Now, this is all supposed to be or all supposed to consummate in the future because of the adverb on Christmas Eve. Again, the action of being able to live in that house for 20 years will not happen unless we go to that particular time of the Christmas Eve, which is a future time. Okay, so we have this future time, but in our main sentence, we have an action that is currently happening and that has already happened, currently happening, and will culminate at a particular future time, which in here is Christmas Eve. Another example is this. He will have been keeping a journal for 10 years next month. Again, we have he will have been keeping a journal for 10 years next month. Now, I hope that with all the meaning and functions we have discussed, you will have the slightest idea as to how these utterance or how these different utterances differ from one another aside in terms of what each means. Always remember to use the correct form of the verb when using a tense aspect combination of your choice. And if there are some questions, we'll just have another separate session. And of course, if you can already answer your own question by reading the chapter on Celso Murcia and Larson Freeman's grammar book, that would be better. Okay, thank you for listening to this lecture on tense aspect system.